All right. Well, so here we go, that marvelous light, and laser light truly is marvelous. Now, I want you to know that we're kind of starting from a beginner perspective. So if you already know a little bit about lasers, bear with us. We'll get a little more advanced as we go. And also, we are going to talk a little bit about physics. Don't let that deter you at all, because it's not hard to understand, and you can't talk about light and lasers without getting into physics a little bit, but it really helps with the understanding so we can all be more effective practitioners. So first of all, really basic, what is a laser? Well, it stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. I hope you win at Trivial Pursuit sometime because you knew that. And how that name came about is an interesting discussion for a different day. But the main features of laser light are that it's monochromatic, coherent, and collimated. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those because there's a lot of light therapy devices out there and a lot of confusion perhaps about what is and isn't a laser and what therapy devices are actually doing laser therapy or not. So lasers are a specific kind of device and a specific kind of light, and I want to make sure there's not confusion. So let's talk about these three aspects of laser light, starting with what it means to be monochromatic. Now, if you notice the picture on the left, that is a prism. And when you shine white light into a prism, we all remember back to science class in 3rd grade, right? Where you shine light into a prism, and the prism breaks the light up into its spectrum, into its rainbow of colors based on wavelengths. And that happens because different wavelengths of light travel through the glass at different rates, and they have more refraction or more bending as they do, and so it splits it up. Great. It also shows that white light is really composed of many colors of light, and when you mix all the colors together, our eye perceives that as white light. But you can separate the light into its constituent spectrum, into the various wavelengths of light. Lasers, on the other hand, like the picture on the right, when you shine a laser through a prism, what comes out the other end is the same color as what went in, because laser light is all one color. It's all monochromatic. Now, here's a little tip. When we talk about color, we're really talking about something called wavelength. Wavelength is color. For all intents and purposes in our discussion today, wavelength is color. So if I talk about the wavelength of the light, I'm really talking about the color. Is it red? Is it blue? Etc. And because laser light is all one wavelength, it is all one color, hence monochromatic. And that's one unique aspect of laser light. Okay, the next unique aspect is that laser light is what we call coherent. Coherent means that each of the waves in the light is all lined up together, like the picture on the top shows. So the waves are all in sync. Think about like the marching band, where everybody's marching left, right together. That's in sync, that's coherent. Incoherent light, like you might get out of another light source, for example, an LED, although it may all be one color. Like if you have a red LED, you're going to get red light. It's probably pretty close to monochromatic, but it's incoherent, which means none of the waves are in sync, and therefore it's kind of scattered and it's not as powerful. Now, laser light being coherent is, by definition, much more powerful because of the combined effect of all of those waves moving in sync. It's kind of like if you've ever heard stories about bridges collapsing, because you get a wave that's set up in the bridge and it self-amplifies until the bridge, due to an earthquake or even due to traffic, shakes itself apart. It's the same sort of thing with laser light when it's coherent, because everything is moving in sync, then you get the combined power of all the waves instead of having scattered power. So an example I like to use is a rowboat. When you have a rowing team, if everybody rowed at a different time and at a different pace, you would not have speed or power from that boat, and you would maybe not get anywhere at all. But when you have every rower united, all stroking at the same time, then you maximize your speed and power. And of course, the whole sport is based on that synchronization and that power. That's how you win. Okay, next, let's talk about what it means to be collimated. Coherent laser light, if you shine it on something that's distant, as you know, you're going to get a dot, like you do with a laser pointer. Incoherent light, like you'd get from an LED, you're going to get kind of a large, ill-defined dot or circle, and the farther away you get, the more the circle's going to expand, and that's based, of course, on the fact that the incoherent light is coming out at all different directions. Coherent laser light, by nature, is collimated. It all comes out going exactly the same direction, and that's why whether you're 1 yard away or 50 yards away, the dot is going to be almost the same size. It's not going to grow very much when the laser's been properly constructed. And so that's why you get the concentration, and that's part of why laser light is so effective for acupuncture applications. Okay, so with those basic understandings about laser light, then hopefully that helps us understand the difference when people have some sort of a light source and they're doing some sort of a treatment with it. We ought to be able to tell right away if it's a laser or not. Simply shine it on the wall. If you get a dot, you're dealing with a laser, assuming you're dealing with a visible wavelength of light. All right, so what is laser acupuncture? I wonder why it doesn't say acupuncture in the header. It's supposed to. Okay, well, first of all, talk about laser acupuncture, we have to talk about acupuncture. And for our working definition today, we're going to say that acupuncture is a process of stimulating specific points on specific meridians for intentional purposes. So that makes acupuncture different than simply sticking needles in the body somewhere. You might stick a needle into a trigger point and you might call it dry needling, but that's not acupuncture, because acupuncture deals with acupuncture points on meridians for intentional purposes. And acupuncture, of course, traditionally penetrates the skin using a needle. So if that's our working definition of what acupuncture is for, then laser acupuncture is, of course, doing the same thing, but using a laser. So you have the same principles that you have in needle acupuncture, using specific points on meridians for a specific purpose, but you penetrate the skin without piercing it. That's the beautiful thing about laser light, is that it actually penetrates the skin, but it does so in a way that is completely safe, completely sterile. It leaves the skin intact. It's non-invasive. So penetration, but non-invasive penetration, is the hallmark of laser acupuncture. Of course, it has the whole litany of benefits that go with that. It's not painful. There's no risk of infection. It can be done on areas that are really tender. You can do it on children, elderly. All of those good things come with that. Now, I want to point out that other adjunctive laser techniques are not laser acupuncture. So let me give you an example of that. If I take a laser here, and if I stimulate a point, I'm doing that because it's an acupuncture point, and I'm trying to treat that point, then I'm stimulating a point, I'm performing laser acupuncture. If, on the other hand, I take the same laser and I paint an area because I'm trying to do wound healing, for example, and so I'm painting the area of the wound, that is not laser acupuncture, because I'm not stimulating an acupuncture point on a meridian with the intention of having it cause an effect. So I've seen a lot of tools and techniques out there designed to bathe an area with light, for example, or designed to treat a wound for wound healing, designed to treat pain by lasering the pain. All of those things are great, and I have no problem with any of that. They're scientifically researched, they're proven, they're effective, but that's not laser acupuncture. So I hope I've made the distinction here. And what we're talking about today is not the medical stuff about pain control and wound healing. We're talking about actually doing laser acupuncture on acupuncture points. All right, so moving on then, let me just check this. And I see there's a few questions rolling in. Let me just address those really quick. Somebody says, I'm sorry, how long is this webinar? Depending on the Q&A, it might go as long as an hour total, maybe a little less. Will Adrian discuss red and blue lasers? Yes, we will get there, absolutely. And I hope that that covers all the questions. Can you stimulate a trigger point with laser? Oh, sure you can. Trigger points tend to be deep. You would want a higher powered laser for that. Of course, that's not laser acupuncture, but yeah, that is an application of lasers. And there are many, many medical applications of lasers. That's one of them. So thanks for the questions. Keep them rolling in. And meanwhile, let's get back into laser acupuncture. So laser acupuncture, safe, effective, painless. We talked about that. It is growing in acceptance and popularity worldwide. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, this was really fringe, considered kind of strange. Now it's very well accepted in the scientific literature. You find laser applications in medicine all over the place, and acupuncture is one of them. All right. When is laser acupuncture used instead of needle? Well, we've talked about that. When you don't want to use a needle. So needle-phobic patients, sensitive locations, infants, elderly, even when you don't have needles available. One of my favorite stories was from one of my instructors who ended up at a family barbecue after work one day, and somebody hurt their back, and he didn't have any needles with him to do acupuncture to relieve the back pain, but he had a laser with him, and it was a laser he had just gotten. He'd just actually gotten it from me. I'd sent it to him to try out, and he immediately, used that laser on the family member, and within a few minutes, he had her pain under control. She was able to get up, walk around, function, and he called me the next day to rave about how much he loved this laser. So it can be used really anytime, anywhere that you would use acupuncture. There are some contraindications, and we'll get into that in a minute. But we'll continue now with kind of the basics. Kimberly, go ahead.
I was just going to share that I can't tell you how many times I've had a laser in my bag when I've been at the airport or on an airplane and been able to help somebody who had a headache or who was in pain. And especially when I'm at family gatherings, when you're the acupuncturist and you go to a family gathering, everybody says, oh, will you treat this and will you treat that? So instead of having to do a full treatment on a treatment table, I always have my lasers on hand and one in my purse. And so it's been a lifesaver at family gatherings so that I can do a quick treatment and then get back into the family gathering.
Makes you popular, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Thank you for that. And I see Carlos asked a question about in certain treatments you use different deep needling. So different depths of how you needle. How do you deal with this with lasers? Carlos, we will get to that. If you don't mind, we'll hit that in due course in the presentation. Great question. Keep them coming. All right, let's give a quick history of lasers and laser acupuncture. Lasers were first invented in around 1960, and they were theoretically proposed before that, first created around 1960. And in the 1960s, experiments almost immediately began in using lasers for healthcare, focusing on skin. And wound healing and scar minimization were discovered pretty quickly that lasers had a positive effect for those things. Then there was a Hungarian doctor named Mester, and he was working with skin cancer, and he thought that you could kill tumors with skin cancer. So he was testing this theory on mice with skin tumors, and they would remove the hair from the mice, or they would use mice that tended to not grow hair. So that they could better stimulate them. And they found out that no, you really couldn't kill the tumors with lasers, but what you did do is stimulate hair growth. And now they have various FDA cleared laser treatments for hair growth out there, hats and helmets and things that you can wear that stimulate the scalp with laser, and they do promote hair growth. So that's kind of how lasers first started getting looked at in healthcare. And this gave birth to a field now known as photobiology, or the study of the biological effects of light. And I wanted to just interject here that this was considered quackery years ago. I was actually at a museum a few years back, and it was I was there with my kids at this science museum, but they had this special traveling display called the Museum of Quackery. And it, I guess, tours around the country. So I went into the Museum of Quackery to check it out. And they talked about phototherapy using different wavelengths of light and shining different wavelengths of light on the body to have different effects, and how this was, in the 1930s, 1940s, this quackery sucked in a lot of people and took their money with no effects. And they say that about everything until one day it becomes scientifically accepted fact. And so as much as they mocked and laughed at phototherapy as quackery, it's now cutting edge medical research, and it is now widely accepted and used and promoted. So the moral of the story is, before you start labeling things quackery and saying they don't work, maybe you ought to realize what you don't know, and that in 50 years, the science is going to catch up and show that it worked all along. All right, well, so much for preaching my sermon. Moving on then. The first laser acupuncture research, as opposed to medical laser research, started in the early 1970s, Russia and the United States. By the 80s, then lasers started to gain recognition for acupuncture use without the risks associated with needles. And so some of the research that's gone on, particularly medical research, shows that laser light stimulation helps with cell regeneration and growth, which translates into better wound healing, better recovery from surgery, things like that, decreases pain, reduces inflammation, improves circulation, even stimulates hair growth, like we talked about. These are all medical effects that have been widely researched. And we find that it works because laser light penetrates the skin. It works at the cellular level. It deposits energy directly into the cells. And there's a study called photobiomodulation. This deals with how light modulates biochemical processes in the cell, particularly at the mitochondria. So for example, the correct wavelength or color of laser light increases ATP production and nitric oxide production, and along with many other effects. But even if you just focus on those two things, then you get a lot of good side effects. Increased micro and macro circulation, improved lymphatic drainage, improved local nutrition to the cells. It's also antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal if you use the correct wavelengths. And so when you talk about things like wound healing, surgery recovery, et cetera, these are some of the contributory factors that deal with why laser is so effective in those areas. And I wanted to show you this. I thought this was really fascinating. If you go to PubMed and you type laser acupuncture in the search box for the keywords, this is a plot of the number of results you're going to get. So you notice in the 70s, there were a few studies going on. Into the 80s, it started to really increase. And then it dropped kind of in the mid 90s. And then look what it's done ever since. There are lots and lots of studies being published in the medical literature about laser acupuncture. So you can see why this is gaining so much popularity, and frankly, why so many of you are on the webinar today. This has been one of our best signed up webinars that we've ever put on, and I think I know why. All right, a 1991 study showed that laser light actually travels in the acupuncture meridians through the body, which means that if you take laser light and you shine it on a point and you use a very sensitive photon detector further up that meridian channel, you can detect photons traveling up that channel. And if you get off the channel, you don't detect them. So there is something of a fiber optic effect in the acupuncture meridians that causes the light to travel in the acupuncture channels. Recent studies with fMRI imaging show that laser acupuncture at remote locations on the body has measurable effects on the brain, just like needle acupuncture does. So you can be lasering points on the feet or on the toes, and you can see areas of the brain light up and change as a result of that laser stimulation. So even among the kind of research crowd, the folks that are looking for biological effects and biological mechanisms to explain why acupuncture works, you have to concede that laser light does something biologically and has remote effects throughout the body. And that's, in my opinion, because it travels in the acupuncture meridians, just like remote needling has effects. All right, so if you were to go look through the literature, you'd find that there's a lot of success reports, a lot of studies published about a variety of topics where laser acupuncture has been studied in a controlled setting and found to be effective. Here's a list of some of them, and you can see it's quite a broad list. Here's a few more. And I see I misspelled neonatal abstinence syndrome. Sorry about that. So if you're dealing with laser acupuncture, you can see that it's got about as broad of an application as needle acupuncture in terms of just the sheer number of things that can be treated. And that's because the laser in the end is really just another way of stimulating the acupuncture points, and the magic is done by the acupuncture meridians. Now, there are some, of course, research issues, and this is because medical research always has different points of view. If you publish a study, somebody else will publish a study that contradicts it, or will publish an editorial giving their opinion that you didn't do your study right or whatever. So here's a good example. There was a study done in 2009 by Chow. It was published in The Lancet. Systematic review, 820 patients total in this review, and it studied acute neck pain. And what they found was that laser acupuncture had an immediate effect on reducing pain, and that when somebody completed a course of treatment, multiple treatments, that the relief tended to last a long time, up to 22 weeks after completion of treatment. And hey, that's a super positive study. All this, based on laser acupuncture. But then others said, hey, wait a minute, I don't know, I think your inclusion criteria for studies was too broad, or I think that, 3 of these studies had low quality design and et cetera, because you can pick apart anything. And so then people say, yeah, no, this really didn't show anything at all. So my point in telling you that about this whole pain in the neck is that in the end, what matters is the results you get in your practice with your patients. If you're getting good results, then keep doing what you're doing. There's plenty of research to suggest that you should. But of course, nothing in medicine is ever settled, and the research will continue. And that, in my opinion, is a good thing. All right, we talked about advantages: safe, painless. It's easy to do laser acupuncture and just light the point with the laser. And it's often shown to be as effective as needle acupuncture without having to use a needle. So with that in mind, let's get into some of the nuts and bolts about how to perform laser acupuncture. After we do that, then we're going to talk about choosing lasers, different wavelengths and colors, different power levels, all of those technical things you need to know about lasers. But with whatever laser you have, let's talk about how do you perform this. Well, first, obviously, you locate an acupuncture point that you want to treat. It can be anywhere on the body except near the eyes. If you're anywhere in the vicinity of the face or eyes, you want to be extraordinarily careful with laser, and obviously never ever use laser acupuncture in the eye or on the points surrounding the eyes. If you're anywhere near the face, you need to take all the appropriate precautions so that you don't accidentally shine a laser into somebody's eyes. And I know that's common sense, but I want to reiterate that laser light, being that it's coherent and concentrated, it can be damaging to the retina very quickly. Now, somebody asked earlier, I think it was Carlos, he asked about whether you needle deep or shallow with a needle and how do you do that with a laser. And that's interesting because there's been some research that has shown that if you laser with very superficial pressure on the skin, so you're just barely touching the skin or even off the skin and just shining the light on the spot that you want to treat, it tends to hit the skin and it tends to spread out very kind of superficially on the surface. If you apply a little bit of pressure, then you tend to get deeper penetration with the laser light and you don't get as much spreading in the skin. And if you apply more pressure, you apply moderate to heavy pressure with the laser, you actually move fluid out of the skin and you get even deeper penetration or concentration of the laser light. And so to answer Carlos's question, it essentially comes down to how much pressure you apply with the laser. Obviously, within reason, you never want to apply enough pressure to cause pain, but light pressure or touch versus a little more penetrating pressure will control your depth of penetration with the laser light. All right. We'll also talk about power considerations in penetration. We'll do that in a minute. But first, I want to mention the idea of how long to treat. I usually treat between 15 and 30 seconds with the lasers that I use, and we'll talk about power level and dose in a few minutes. But I target that length of time because anything longer than 15 to 30 seconds, in my opinion, is too cumbersome for practice. And it sure becomes a lot easier and more tempting to just place a needle and let it go and do its thing rather than stay there for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes holding a laser. You're just not going to want to do that. Part of the reason I like laser acupuncture so much is that properly performed, it can be very effective and very quick. 15, 20, 30 seconds per point can get great results. And the other thing is when you're treating a patient with laser, never look at the dot that's being produced on the point. Don't stare at the dot. I think it's better to make skin contact so that the dot is contained and there's no reflected light, because reflected laser light is still laser light. And you're still staring into laser light if you're staring at the dot. I do not recommend that. We'll talk more about safety precautions and eye protection in a few minutes here. So let's talk a little bit about dosing and how much power you have to put into a particular point in order to be effective. So output power of lasers is measured in milliwatts. That's a milli means a thousandth, so thousandths of a watt. If you have a 5 milliwatt laser, it's 5 thousandths of a watt. When you think about it, a light bulb in your house, at least the old school light bulbs, those power levels are measured in watts also, but that might be 60 watts or 100 watts. And lasers are in thousandths of a watt. And again, that's because the kind of light they put out, coherent light, is so much more concentrated and powerful that if you had a laser measured in watts, you'd be, blowing holes in things like tanks or battleships. That's the kind of thing that military lasers are doing. And then they get into, thousands of watts and so on for weapon systems. We don't want to do that. We're in milliwatts. The applied dose, when you apply a dose of laser light to the skin, it's actually measured in joules per square centimeter. A joule is an amount of energy applied. And so if you want to apply a certain amount of energy for every square centimeter of skin, then the size of the dot produced by your laser, the size of the point you're trying to treat, the amount of time that you leave the laser on, because the longer you leave it, the more energy you're depositing in that point, the depth of pressure, the wavelength you're using, because some wavelengths will penetrate better than others. All of those things determine the total energy applied to any specific point. And it gets to be kind of complicated. What I mean by that, there are various schools of thought and various studies and people that will say, oh, you have to apply this many joules per square centimeter or you don't have an effective dose. And measuring joules per square centimeter gets a lot more complicated because all of these factors that I listed here, the size of the dot, the time, the depth, the wavelength, all of that goes into that equation to determine how much of a dose you really put. You could have a very weak laser, but a very tiny dot and be putting a lot of energy in a very tiny point. Versus if you're trying to stimulate an entire square centimeter, well, then you're going to have an awful lot of energy because laser dots are a lot smaller than a square centimeter. So I deal with what's called low-level laser therapy. Okay, I like lasers that have a very small output for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're safer. There's no danger of heating. Even to the eyes, there's a lot less danger. And secondly, I find them to be very effective. There are actually studies using laser light that is so incredibly weak it's barely measurable, and it's having positive effects in the acupuncture system. To me, it comes down to the paradigm of whispering versus shouting. Those are both effective ways of communicating. If you shout at somebody, you are communicating in a certain way, and it can be effective. Whispering can also be effective because you're trying to influence the chi that's already there in the meridian system, and you're trying to get it to move in a certain way, act in a certain way. In my opinion, whispering, giving it a little nudge is all it takes. And I think that's really well aligned with the philosophy of acupuncture. When you needle, how much energy are you really putting into the body through a needle that you place and you leave it for 20, 30, 40 minutes? Maybe you even come and you manipulate the needle. But in the end, in terms of raw energy, if we were to measure joules per square centimeter, it's minuscule. And using a low-level laser kind of imitates that approach, using a minuscule push, just a little bit of a whisper to get the chi flowing and let the body do the rest. Now, the other approach, the shouting approach, this kind of comes from the medical lasers, where they're saying, oh, you have to deposit this many joules at this depth into that trigger point in order to have this pain relieving effect or whatever. And that's fine if that's the approach you're going for. But in acupuncture specifically, I prefer the very low level approach. Feel free to pose questions about those things and about levels and so on. I've done a lot of research in that area and what makes an effective dose. In the end, there are lots of arguments about an effective dose, but if somebody publishes a paper or tries to sell something and says, oh, no, you have to have this many joules to have an effective dose, I would like to know how they know that for an acupuncture point. The only way to know if it worked is if it worked. And so to say, oh, you have to heat the tissue this many degrees, that's not what we're going for. Kimberly, go ahead.
I think the beauty of when people think that you have to go directly to the area of pain and how far you're going to get through the tissue to get to that pain, and if you're going to have to use a shouting approach. But look at the beauty of acupuncture. Somebody can have hip pain or low back pain or a headache in the temples, and we can go all the way down to the foot. And one of my favorite points is gallbladder 41. By creating movement at that point, it pulls energy all the way down, which then would resolve pain in the glutes, which would be a really deep point, or resolves a headache pain. All I have to do is create that movement further down the channel in order to resolve the pain. So when we're talking about whispering and treating that one point, I love to be able to use a laser, because really that's all you're doing. You're just creating a slight pull in order to make the movement. So it's not even necessary in most of our really effective acupuncture techniques to go deep and directly into the area of pain. All we have to do is create movement.
Yeah, I love that. Well put. You don't have to go deep because the meridian goes deep. You just put the movement in the meridian and it takes care of the rest. So if somebody has a deep pain, like you said, the hip, the low back, the glute, yeah, you're not going to get 3 inches penetration with a laser, any laser. I mean, that much power to get that deep is dangerous, to say the least. But that's okay.
And we wouldn't necessarily, in order to be effective, you wouldn't necessarily have to go super deep, way into the problem. There is that type of needling that some acupuncturists use, but my goodness, we get amazing effective results with distal points and Japanese style of acupuncture. So for me personally, if somebody had extreme pain in the glutes and I was treating further down the channel, and like I said, gallbladder 41 is one of my favorites, but then where does that energy need to go next? I might treat gallbladder 41 and then a point on the liver channel on where it's going next. So I've just created an even more pull just by whispering. So I just thought I'd share.
Beautiful. Thank you. Great points. All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about dose then. Let's go ahead and move on. I want to talk about lasers themselves, how to choose a product, how they're classified, what you're looking for. The FDA classifies lasers into different safety classes. Whether they're medical lasers or not, all lasers are classified. So like class 1, that's in your laser printer, that's in your DVD player. These are very low powered lasers, and they're also completely enclosed and therefore not considered a risk. Class 2 and 2A, these are your things like barcode scanners at the store. You don't see anybody, the checker at the grocery store isn't wearing laser safety glasses. These are extremely low powered, and they're also the sorts of things that move quickly. And your blink reflex will protect your eyes, and so they're considered low risk. 3A and 3B, you see I've highlighted those yellow, and that's because the majority of lasers on the market fall into one of these two categories in the applications that we're talking about. So 3A can be potentially dangerous, and it's more dangerous if you use an optical aid, a magnifying glass, glasses, something like that. Most laser pointers are 3A lasers. Glasses are not required. Your blink reflex is fast enough to protect you from 3A lasers as long as you're not intentionally staring at them. But if you accidentally get flashed across the eye, you're not depositing enough power fast enough to do damage. It's only if it's prolonged viewing. That's 3A. And I like 3A because of that. It's got a higher safety factor. 3B, danger. Danger even to the skin in some cases. Immediate eye hazard on a 3B laser. These are your heavy duty lasers, are used in industry, research, light shows, stuff like that. You have to wear goggles when you're around these things. And then there's class 4 lasers that will burn you, that will burn things, that will present a fire hazard. This you have literally a millisecond and your eye is permanently burned if you accidentally flash this laser in your eye. So class 4 lasers, there's no reason you or I should even be messing with these things except in a research or a controlled industrial setting. Huge safety precautions required. So there's your classifications. If you're shopping for a laser, you'll find them that they'll say this is a 3A or a 3B laser. That's most what you run across. I don't like 3B because of the higher power and the associated risk. You're not trying to penetrate 3 inches into the patient when you're doing acupuncture. So a 3B is not required, in my opinion. Now, other safety considerations when you're looking for a laser, you need to, first of all, consider the eyes. What do you need for protective glasses? You can see that I've got a picture of some glasses here on the screen. These are a special safety glass that we have at acubeam.com. These glasses are unique in that they protect against 2 different wavelengths. And let me clarify. Your typical glasses are designed for a specific set of wavelengths. So you might have glasses that are designed to protect against red lasers, for example, and they're very effective at blocking red wavelengths, but they don't do anything to block blue or green or any other color. Likewise, you could have one that blocks blue, but it doesn't block red. These the glasses that I'm showing here on this on the screen that we have at AcuBeam, these are designed to protect against blue and red. They're double coated. They have one coating on the inside, one coating on the outside, one that protects against red and one that protects against blue. And because of that, these can be safely used, one set of glasses for both red and blue lasers, which is, to me, much more convenient. Now, if you're using very low-powered lasers, you may not have to use glasses. It really is up to you. It's your practice. It's your patients. You decide what you're comfortable with. In my opinion, precaution is always better, simply because you would never want somebody to think you weren't being adequately safe. But whatever laser you have, make sure you're well aware of the safety precautions and understand that a laser is not a toy. Okay, next, safety considerations. You need to stay away from cancer because lasers do stimulate cell growth and cell metabolism. The last thing you want to do is promote something wrong. Otherwise, lasers are harmless. In the power levels that we're talking about, they're non-heating, so there's no danger to the skin, danger of burning, things like that. And even using on sick patients, frail, elderly, children, these things are all totally fine to do, totally effective as long as you take proper safety precautions. All right. So we talked about how power is measured in milliwatts. Oh, go ahead, Kimberly.
I wondered if you might want to answer a few questions before you move on.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what we got on questions. All right. Let's see. We said, can you stimulate a trigger point with a laser? We talked about that. Talked about Carlos depth. Can you use laser for auricular therapy? Yeah, absolutely. You can stimulate auricular points with a laser, and that's highly effective to do.
Can I share a story?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I have a child that I'm treating right now, and I created a home care treatment for this child, and I just happened to have it sitting on my desk. I realized when we were in the webinar, so I've covered up her last name, so I'm not showing anything. So I have this child that I'm going to send mom home with a laser so mom can treat ear points as necessary. And so I've created a treatment protocol, and I'm going to guide mom to treat the points on the ear. She's only 3 years old. It will not take very long to treat these points. I wouldn't, maybe 10 seconds per point for such a little person. And I've also given mom some treatment points that she can treat at home for the individual condition. So somebody asked, one of the questions was in relation to children, and on an adult, I might treat for 15 to 30 seconds. If it's a child, their bodies are so receptive, and the acupuncture channels change so quickly that 10 to 15 seconds is really all that's needed. I've done infants. And so I wanted to mention the ear and children in that same example.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Excellent application. I've done a lot of auricular therapy with laser and get great results. It's fast, easy, comfortable, and I really recommend it. Let's see, other questions. Reference for those two studies. Yeah, we're going to be posting a link where you can download a paper that we've got that'll have a lot of references in it, including those studies. So that'll be up in a minute. And let's see, how do you know the laser gets into the skin? Go
ahead. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
You go ahead, Kimberly.
Okay. That was a question that I had in the very beginning when I first started using laser. To me, if I wasn't using a needle, then it wasn't effective acupuncture, because I didn't know better. And then I began exploring with lasers. And here's an example. Years ago, when I was first learning acupuncture points, and I recognized that if I treated stomach 44 on the foot, I could change somebody's nausea, or I could change somebody's acid reflux immediately, just by, I could do it with my thumb, I could do it with a needle. And so I used that same instance as I was playing with lasers in the beginning to see what type of a change I could make in the body. And when I could treat that point and make that change in the body, then my life circumstances kept happening over and over again. I would practice and I would see a change, and I would practice and I would see a change. So that is one way. I just had to trust and practice and see what happened. And of course it always worked. And then the other thing is, once I recognized that I could actually change the condition of the channels, because I work with AcuGraph and I measure the acupuncture pathways. So I have a way on a computer screen where I can measure the acupuncture points, show on a computer screen where the imbalances are. I could then treat the points that I would want to treat with a laser and be able to make those changes. So that was another proof. And then one more proof story. One of my favorite protocols for the ear is treating shoulder pain. And I've done it with microcurrent, I've done it with needles. But when you can take a laser and you can treat a shoulder pain protocol, and somebody has shoulder pain, and you could use the laser, and then you can have them recreate the pain, there's no doubt in my mind whether or not that laser is penetrating through the skin and whether it changes the channel. So that's when patients just go, wow, I can't believe that you made that change simply with a laser. So I'm a believer. It took me a little while, didn't it? You remember?
Well, sure, but you'd never been introduced to it. And of course it takes a while. Yeah.
Well, and then the other thing is, because I work in the acupuncture field, I remember when laser was a new technology and people had so many questions. And the best way that I found, especially those who are really sensitive to feeling chi, and I say, well, you know what, let's just try it. And I will treat a point like large intestine 4 or GV20 on the top of the head. And the practitioner sits there and says, oh my gosh, it works. They could feel the change. They could feel the flow. So somebody who's really sensitive, it's kind of fun to introduce them to laser if they're skeptical.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from a straight nuts and bolts perspective about how do we know it's penetrating the skin? Well, there have been a lot of studies done about depth of penetration and so on. There have been studies, like I mentioned, about the fiber optic effect. And frankly, you can, take a laser and shine it on the back of your finger and see it light up the front. Or even in a dark room, you can do it through your palm and actually see the laser light penetrating through. So hopefully that answers that. And I don't see any other unanswered questions at the moment. So let's talk about a couple of other considerations here. We were talking about equipment and the measurement in milliwatts of power. Do you still have something, Kimberly?
There still are several more questions. Do you want to answer them in a little bit?
There they are. I didn't see them. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, let me keep going with questions. Okay. Let's see. Virginia says, some minutes I lost as a recommended dose in children. Kimberly, you addressed that, usually smaller than the adult dose, but it depends on the power of your laser, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Would you use laser on pregnant women? I read an interesting study yesterday, not kidding, on inducing labor in pregnant women with lasers, and found that it was effective to do that. And so, yeah, there's no contraindication other than the contraindications that you would have in normal acupuncture. For example, there's certain points you don't treat on a pregnant woman unless you're trying to induce labor. Well, the same goes for lasers. Wonder if it's okay to use in Canada, Monique says. Good question. I would check with Canada. I happen to know of a lot of
Canadian acupuncturists who are using it. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I know a lot of them. I was about to say the same thing. In terms of rules in your particular area, you'd have to check. In the US, every state has different rules. I've looked into some states. In general, I've not seen a lot of issues. When do you use the red and blue? We'll get to that one. Avoiding the eye area, stomach 1, stomach 2, bladder 2 for eye health. I would not laser those if it were me. I know people that do. I don't think it's worth the potential risk. Even if there was an eye problem later, the patient had something else go wrong, you wouldn't want to get blamed even if you didn't cause it. So I just, as a matter of course, I stay away from the eyes. Is Da Chi sensation felt? Normally, no. Now, I've run across a few patients that are sensitive enough that they can actually feel the light. They can feel it moving, spreading, propagating up the meridian. And you will have sensitive patients like that. It's a pleasant feeling.
It's a pleasant. I was going to say, in a non-technical term, it's the ooey gooey, squishy, soft, nice, yummy feel when you feel chi moving in your body. That is what you can expect to feel. That's why it's so great on kids.
Yeah, exactly. And then Monique said red and blue. We're getting there on the red and blue. So, okay. Hopefully we're caught up on questions. All right. The lasers I tend to like, 5 milliwatt, that makes them class 3A, low powered, safer. And so generally that's what I look for. Now, when you're buying laser equipment, you can pay, $100, you can pay $10,000 for literally the same light. You can have a laser that, has lots of claims and so on that costs thousands of dollars that outputs a 635 nanometer beam at 5 milliwatts. And you can have a $100 laser that outputs a 635 nanometer beam at 5 milliwatts. So I had an instructor one time who told me, and I think this is sage advice, he says the human body does not know how much you chose to pay for a device. All it knows is what light is coming in. So you can have the same output on many different devices. Consider your return on investment. How much can you invest in a laser, get quality, and consider what you need. You're not doing laser surgery here. If all you're trying to do is stimulate an acupuncture point, it does not necessarily require a $10,000 laser to do so. And then you need to know your specifications. You need to know what you're buying. So we talked earlier, we said that wavelength refers to color, and here's a little wavelength chart. 450 nanometer, that's one of the wavelengths I like. That's right in the middle of the blue, a nice sapphire blue. And 635 is the other wavelength I like, and that's heading into the orange red, heading toward red. And so it's a very bright, intense red. But this is where the wavelengths land. Now, the difference in the wavelengths. Red, the 635 nanometer is the most common. If you go to the store and you just try to buy a laser pointer, like, at the office store or something, that's going to be a cheaper diode. Diodes are what produce the laser light. That's going to be a 650 to 670 nanometer, and that's not the most biologically effective. The more biologically effective wavelength is 635, and that's a little bit more specialized of a laser. It's not just a pointer from the store. This wavelength is produced by the cells of the body, literally produced by the body cells. During cellular division, there's a burst of this light as the replicated chromosomes divide from one another. Also, I just read yesterday or 2 days ago that 635 nanometer is actually one of the strongest wavelengths in Arctic light in the wintertime. I thought that was interesting. It has a stimulatory effect, so it increases ATP production, increases cellular growth. It's used for wound healing. In acupuncture parlance, we would call that tonifying. It has a tonifying effect. So I use red light for tonification. I use blue light, the 450 nanometer blue, which is not the ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet is 405, not 450. And I've seen ultraviolet purple blue lasers for really cheap, and they're not blue. I even bought one time. I just bought it on eBay because I was experimenting with lasers, and they said, yeah, 450 nanometer blue, and it arrived, and it was a 405 El Cheapo. Of course, when I contacted the seller, I got nothing. So you want to watch that and make sure you're buying from somebody reputable and get the wavelength you think you're getting. The blue has a calming inhibitory effect. In acupuncture, I like that for sedation. And then there are other wavelengths out there. So for example, the higher wavelengths, the 800 to 1000 nanometer, those are infrared lasers. That's in a true infrared, it's not even visible light. It penetrates deeper. Those wavelengths go deeper, but they also have a heating effect in the tissue because infrared light we perceive as heat. And so if you're having concentrated infrared light in a spot, you have to be careful about heating effects. Although that's really good for things like sore muscles in a non-acupuncture perspective, I don't like it for acupuncture. I like the red and the blue the best, sedating and tonifying. And then there's the green lasers. These are in the 530 range. Green laser light, I've not seen much good evidence for. It penetrates poorly. Part of the reason green for a while enjoyed a little bit of popularity is because when lasers were first developed, red was all you could get. And that's because the process of producing laser light requires certain physics and only certain materials. And so the materials that were available could make red. And the next laser color that was invented was green. And so people that were using red immediately wanted to experiment with green for acupuncture, but it just didn't really do much. And so now there are a whole variety of colors of lasers that you can get, but I still think red and blue are the most effective in my opinion, the 635 red and the 450 blue. One other thing to point out, there are what are called laser needle systems. Here's one that you can see where it's got a bunch of fiber optic cables and it's got laser heads that you tape onto the patient, and it's got a high powered output through that fiber optic cable, and you leave these taped in place for minutes, half an hour, something like you would with an acupuncture needle. These are used a lot like a needle. In my opinion, that's overkill. I've never found the need to have that much power for that long to stimulate a point. And these are very expensive systems, but I do know that they publish studies, they get good results, and so I'm not knocking them. It's just not my first choice, primarily due to the cost. So to summarize then, laser acupuncture, safe, effective, comfortable. There's a lot of good studies out there. It's very easy to perform. When you're shopping for equipment, basically you need to make sure you understand wavelength, power level, and safety considerations. And remember, always safety first. So with that in mind, I want to invite you to download this free guide, The Top 4 Myths About Laser Acupuncture. It's just something that we put together here at Meridia. And you can download it for free. It's at the URL that I'm showing there, bit.ly/laser-guide. And you can go download that now, get your free PDF. There's a lot of research references in there as well. So with that up, while you're getting that, I wanted to address a few more of these questions before we close today. So we talked about the difference between red and blue. That was one that Monique asked about. And then, let's see, Virginia says, when the patient has problems to go to the treatment, what is the minimum frequency needed to maintain the treatment? So in other words, how many times per week do you need to treat? Again, it's a lot like needle acupuncture. If somebody is acute, you might treat several times in a week. If you're dealing with a longer term, more corrective sort of thing, you might do weekly. And for a maintenance patient, they might only come in once a month for a tune-up. So the rules don't really necessarily change because you're using a laser as a tool. The rules of acupuncture still apply. Next question. Somebody said, what about yin tong? And the yin tong point, yeah, absolutely. You can treat that with laser. Just be careful to take proper precautions, perhaps block the eyes with your hand or with the patient's hand with safety glasses, something to make sure that they're not going to get any stray light going into the eye. All righty, I don't see any other questions. So go ahead and grab that laser guide. And if you have any other questions, now's the time to ask them. Kimberly and I are both here. Kimberly, while we're getting more questions in, do you have one more favorite laser treatment story you want to share really quick before we finish up?
I do. I have this one patient who comes to my clinic, and they are convinced that if I use needles on them, that their body goes hyperactive, and he allows me to treat. It's funny because I treat husband and wife. I can put all the needles I want in wife, and he just considers himself very sensitive to needles. So I can use 4 tacks. That's all I can do to treat his whole body. So what I have found is I will choose 4 tacks, and he counts and he watches to make sure there are only 4 and that I get them all off. But then I will go around and do whatever else it is that I want to do with the laser. And I'm telling you what, this guy is my biggest cheerleader. And, you know, some people are just needle phobic, and I wouldn't be able to treat them if I didn't have another tool. And because I have this other tool and it's so effective, it opens up many avenues to allow people to have acupuncture with my acupuncture theory, but not puncturing.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. And I love that, because if you need to have a non-needle, and everybody should have a non-needle technique.
Absolutely.
And if you're looking at non-needle techniques, laser has a whole bundle of advantages over all the others. Let's hit a couple of more of these questions. Tara says, would you use blue to sedate a point like Li11 or liver 2 to reduce heat? Kimberly, you want to address that? What do you think?
I would love to. So in my experience with red and blue laser, if I was using some type of a sedation technique, I could replace that technique and use the blue laser. So if there's inflammation, I know you talked about using directly on the acupuncture channel to get really good results. I will also use a blue laser and do a surround the dragon technique if there's a wound. And so because blue helps to resolve inflammation, I will just treat all the way around the wound with the blue laser, and it helps right after a scar, a surgery, and when there's a scar. So there's inflammation in a scar, and I want to reconnect the chi going through the scar. I will use the blue laser. If it's an old scar that's been there for a really long time and there's no more inflammation, it's just kind of a weak area, I'll use the red laser. So red is like filling with chi. Blue is trying to pull off excess chi.
Beautiful. Okay. Let's see. Please give some examples of your use of the blue laser. Well, you just did, I think. I will report, no joke. This morning, my daughter woke up, terrible headache. And I'm not making this up because you couldn't make this stuff up. And she's going, Dad, this headache is killing me. Can you do anything to help me out? And I'm like, well, I've got a laser here. And I had a blue laser. I treated several points. It took the edge off of her headache. And I thought, this is just too crazy. I'm like 2 hours away from giving this webinar on lasers. And what a timely reminder. Heidi says, can you use red blue laser on horses, dogs, etc.? Yeah, sure. Just the same way that you would perform acupuncture on those animals, you can use lasers on those animals as well. Now, having said that, I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not giving veterinary advice, and you should consult the laws in your municipality. All the usual disclaimers apply. But yes, I know for a fact that I've seen lots and lots of animal acupuncture done with lasers, and it's great.
I have another way that I will use a blue laser. So even if I have, if I'm going to use needles, somebody just mentioned, what about fibromyalgia? I treat a lot of fibromyalgia. And so there are times when someone is so chi stagnant that no matter where you're going to put a needle, it's going to hurt them because there's so much stagnation going on. I have found that if I will treat the point first with the laser, calm the area down. So I'd use the blue laser, calm the area down and get chi moving a little bit before I put a needle in, it totally takes away that effect of every needle hurting. So that's another way that I use laser for those patients that are just jumpy and have a lot of issues with pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never had a patient jump from using a laser, oddly enough.
Never.
All right. So you addressed fibromyalgia. Let's see, we have average time per acupuncture point is 15 to 30 seconds. How many times can you stimulate the same point in one treatment? Is one time enough? Thank you. Let me speak to this for a minute. Generally, yeah, one time is enough. And there is something called the Arndt-Schultz law. In a nutshell, it means that there's a response curve that looks like this. And as you do more stimulation, you get better and better response to a certain point. And then more stimulation beyond that, you get less response and even negative response. I discovered this when I had a canker sore. And it's not an acupuncture approach, but I was lasering my canker sore to help it heal faster. And I thought, well, gee, if some laser's good, more is better. So I was hitting it multiple times a day for a long time. And that thing hung around for like 10 days. And that was before I understood the Arndt-Schultz law, that I was inhibiting healing by over-treating it. So you want to hit the sweet spot of giving it the stimulation it needs. And then we're doing it.
Then let the acupuncture channel do its work. That's the beauty of working with acupuncture points and laser.
Yeah. So a more direct answer to your question, is one time enough? Yeah, it usually is. Now, if you wanted to do it, a couple of times a day with hours in between, something like that might be appropriate in an acute situation. But it's not like you need to treat the point over and over and over to get it to work. Would you needle it over and over and over again? I would not. Rebecca says, would you ever use a blue laser to paint a small area of pain? Sure I would. I did that yesterday. I've been having some jaw pain right here in my TMJ, and I used both blue and red on it yesterday, and actually feel quite a bit better today. And then We have a
And
question.
you're going to get better results if you also treat the points in association with it, because you want the heat to move through that area. If you're going to just paint over it, you're dealing more of a superficial. I'll have people say, oh, do I use a laser like this? Let me just show you an example. They'll say, oh, is this how it works? And they'll float it around. No, what you really want to do is you want the laser to be directly on the skin, creating movement in the channel. And if you think of an area, if you had a wound and maybe you're trying to resolve some of the inflammation on the surface level, that can help. But if you want to get deep, I would definitely surround the dragon or treat the acupuncture points that will cross through that pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. So in other words, treating a point of pain all by itself without addressing the acupuncture meridians, you're not getting the full effect you should.
Yeah, I've had people run it up and down the meridian. Oh, is this what you do? No, that's not what you do. Anyway.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay, we have, how is the experience of using Roeda Raku points in treatment? Very good. Using Roeda Raku points for balancing the graph. You can do that with laser and you can have very good effect. Is your experience similar to that, Kimberly?
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the proving factors then that made me understand that lasers work, because if it can change the graph, then I know any technique that I use. If it can change the graph, then it's a good technique.
There you go. Rebecca says, any research on using lasers to treat gums? I've not read any. That doesn't mean there's not research out there. I would imagine there probably is, particularly when you're dealing with things like oral surgery, wound healing, maybe gingivitis. So I would go look it up.
I think I wrote a blog post about that one time. The patient wanted to fire me because she was so afraid of needles. And so I talked her into coming back one more time, and it was her tooth pain that she had, and I used the laser. You just have to get creative. I definitely would use it on gums if the need be. Obviously, you wouldn't want to use it on anyone else afterwards, but
yeah. Or you'd put a plastic bag or something, yeah. Okay, I don't see any further questions, and we actually went. Oh, there are?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Can you stimulate the same point with both blue and red laser? You could, but it wouldn't be necessary.
Good answer. And what's the other one?
I guess that was you saw the gums one, you had just missed the
one. Okay, I just missed the other one. All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think, wow, that went a little longer than we expected, but great questions. I hope you got some good information that you can take home and start using right away. And if you have more questions, you want more info, visit acubeam.com or contact us. And we're glad to answer questions personally, one-on-one, and help you in any way that we can. So thanks, everybody, for attending today, and we will see you next time. Kimberly, thank you very much.
Thank you.